Welcome to the Miami Sports Pod. Will Manso, Clay Ferrero. Yes, we are back, and we got to be back, Clay, when we got two teams in the Eastern Conference Finals. Miami Heat representing the East in the NBA against the Celtics. Meanwhile, the Panthers, what a story. First time since 1996, they will take on the Hurricanes. The amazing part is, I know all of South Florida knows, both as eighth seeds. Clay, as we start, it's the question everybody wants to know. We're going to break down the matchups and especially the Heat Celtics, given the third time in 4 years. But which one is more surprising to you? The Heat or the Panthers?
Well, first let me ask, how was that vacation that you scheduled for the first week of May? Because the one that I'm on in this second week of May is just going splendidly because we all anticipated that this was going to happen. I still am more surprised by the Miami Heat, and it's less about the teams than it is, number one, the sports. And the randomness that I think at times we see in hockey. And a lot of times it's the hot goalie, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
It's rare to have that level of randomness with a team making a type of run in the NBA. The other problem was I just felt like it was impossible for a team to turn it on and off in, going from regular season to playoffs. And the thing with the Miami Heat was it wasn't even that they turned it on from the regular season to the postseason, because their first playoff game play-in game was a disaster.
Oh, yeah. Smoked by the Hawks, yeah.
The second play-in game, they were down by 6 with like 7 minutes to go. And thankfully for them, Max Strus had the best game of the season for him up to that point and really kept him afloat. So, but with 6 minutes left to go, and their season was over.
Yeah, they were down 85-80 with 5 minutes left. 85-80. I'll never forget. 5 minutes left, 85-80. I thought, okay, it's done.
So for me, it's not that they just flipped a switch. It was that something happened, because if you flip a switch, you're gonna do it before you get to the fourth quarter of the second play-in game. So I'm surprised. I figured, okay, they skated by Chicago. They're going to lose in 4, maybe 5 against the Bucks.
I thought, I get your take, and I agree with it, by the way. I mean, the Heat, surprising all year long. We said this doesn't look like a team that's capable of turning on. This looks like a one-and-done team. Oh, by the way, a team that may not even make the playoffs. They sneak in and they're here. It is shocking. It's surprising. I definitely fall into the category of that. But when I compare the two, I picked the Panthers because I look at a team that, like the Heat, showed no signs all season long of the ability to turn it on, and that was going to be a dangerous team in the playoffs. But unlike the Heat, right, the Panthers had never done this before. The Heat have been in these situations the last few years where they have played well in the playoffs and made runs maybe more surprising than expected. The bubble run, obviously a surprise. Last year, they were a 1 seed. Still, they got to within a shot of the NBA Finals. This was a team that, with the core of Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, had shown they could get to that level. Panthers, on the other hand, had a new head coach who's the losingest coach in the history of the league. You had a new star player, Matthew Tkachuk, who was absolutely phenomenal all season long, and somehow as good or even better in the playoffs. He has been every bit as good and even more so than advertised. But you had the inconsistency of goal. You had Lyon all of a sudden playing more than Bob. You were wondering what the heck is going on there. Again, I mentioned Paul Maurice never seemed to have a real grasp of what this team was. And you said to yourself, this is a team that if they get in, they're going to be done right away, especially against the greatest regular season team of all time in Boston. So to me, that was more surprising. But let's be honest, they're both surprising. Yeah. It's both shocking that both are in this position. And to have them both now set to begin the Eastern Conference Finals is phenomenal. So, Clay, we're going to talk about the Heat. Heat Celtics. Say that again. For the third time in 4 years, the second year in a row. I mean, this is the premier rivalry in the Eastern Conference. And when I look at this matchup, the first thing that comes to my mind is if Jimmy Butler is healthy, I like Miami's chances. If Jimmy Butler is not healthy, I like Boston's chances, obviously. And Jimmy, for those that aren't aware, has been dealing with that ankle injury, suffered in game 2 against the Knicks, didn't play a game. Can it be a situation where Jimmy's not at his best and Miami wins this series?
No. And maybe being at his best is, everybody's hurt at this point in the season. That's the old cliche. However, the Jimmy Butler that we saw in games 3, 4, 5, and 6 against the Knicks is not going to get it done for Miami. And look, it's because of the ankle. It's not, hey, Jimmy Butler needs to be better. No, it's the ankle that's causing this. But in order for the Miami Heat to beat the Boston Celtics, they need Jimmy Butler to be the Jimmy Butler that he was against Milwaukee. That doesn't mean that he has to score 56 points in a game and what do you average? 37 points in that series. Yeah. It doesn't mean that he has to do that. It means that he has to bring the force and the intensity because, well, I know I was covering the Panthers. You were in the building with Jimmy. It kind of felt like just watching the Heat games on television, and you can tell me if it felt this way up close, that Jimmy didn't control the game. There wasn't that like assertive dominance, like that thing that you can't quite measure, but you know is there because it's Jimmy. It felt like that was also lacking, and I think also because of all this because of the ankle. But I think he needs to put that sort of imprint on the entire Boston series, whether it's scoring, getting in the passing lanes, disrupting Boston's offense, finding his teammates, making the right basketball play. It felt like not only physically was Jimmy off, not only were his stats off, but it felt like because of the injury, he also wasn't quite himself when it came to like that maniacal, psychotic nature that he brings to the game.
Maybe there was something there, Clay, and of course Jimmy would never admit that, and Eric Spoelstra would never tell you that Jimmy's limited or anything, but I think there's no question that ankle was an issue. But I will say, I think bigger picture, a couple of things. I think the Knicks laid down a blueprint, and not all teams can do it because the Knicks defensively are an excellent team, and they showed that. But I thought the changes that the Knicks made where they were basically taking the ball out of Jimmy's hands. You know, you say double and triple. Jimmy said quadruple at one point in the post game because it really was sending 3-4 guys. Jimmy making the right basketball play, getting those guys, getting the ball to his guys as defenders came his way. I think it's something that when you look at as a whole is something opposing teams, the Knicks did it, the Celtics may do it. I don't know capable-wise how much the Celtics really want to risk that, leave shooters open. In Milwaukee, you referenced that Milwaukee series where Jimmy averaged 36, 37 a game. The Heat shot 45, 46% from three. Against the Knicks, they barely shot 30% from three as a team. When the Heat aren't shooting threes well, we saw all season how much they struggle. And if a team is going to take away Jimmy and Jimmy passes out and his teammates don't hit threes, I think New York is about the only team in these playoffs they could have beaten because the Knicks offensively are not a juggernaut. Against a Boston team that we saw on Sunday, Jason Tatum put up 51 points. We know what Jaylen Brown is capable of. They're going to have issues. So I guess the overriding question is if Jimmy is anywhere close to being healthy, right? Not 100%, nobody is. He can be himself. I think if at worst he gets double, he'll find ways to get the basket, get the free throw line, create. But if Boston's going to try to take the game out of Jimmy's hands, which they maybe will do, got to hit shots. And I think that's the bigger picture. So can Jimmy carry this team? Absolutely. But Jimmy has shown that he is going to defer to teammates at times. And when the Heat are at their best, teammates come up big. Max Strus, phenomenal. Gabe Vincent had a good game 1 and 2 against the Knicks, tailed off. Caleb Martin has been just so consistent in his effort on offense and defense. Duncan Robinson had a couple of moments. And then how about Bam? I think Bam is probably – it's hard to call an all-star, multiple-time all-star, an X factor, but Bam plays really well historically against Boston. He has to play at double-figure, double-double Bam, 20 and 10, 22 and 11 Bam, not 17 and 8 Bam that we saw for the second half of the season for me to think that the Heat will have success and find a way to win 4 games against Boston.
And I want to go back to what you said about Jimmy Butler when he's at his best, that everybody else benefits and other guys are hitting shots. I think that kind of goes back to if he's aggressive early in the game, then it opens up stuff because there's just this overwhelming confidence that permeates the whole team. When Jimmy goes out there and scores a few, then it's like, we better take care of him from a defensive perspective. And then that leaves open the other guys. And so there's like the confidence of seeing the ball go in the basket when it's Jimmy Butler isn't just for Jimmy Butler. It's for Kyle Lowry. It's for Max Strus. It's for Gabe Vincent. It's for everybody else. So I think it was a matter of all of that against the Knicks, that the fact that Jimmy wasn't himself, the ball wasn't going in the basket early. They were then double, triple teaming him. The other guys didn't have the level of confidence that they did in the Milwaukee series because they didn't get off to the same sorts of starts at times that they did. Go back. I mean, how many times did Jimmy start off with double digits in the first quarter in the Milwaukee series?
Milwaukee, or close he set the tone. Yeah.
So I think all of that goes into play. I also don't know if Boston is built to do that sort of thing where they're just going to like double, triple team.
Yeah, blitz Jimmy.
Yeah. Are they built to rotate like that? Boston, typically, they're like a switch everything type of team a lot of times. And so it's like, all right, if they switch and they double, like, can you go from all season doing one thing and then switch it just for a playoff series? And I know that Eric Spoelstra has done that with his group before. I don't know enough about Boston's personnel to know if Joe Mazzulla can institute that and they can execute it to the level that the Knicks did or the Heat have done in the past.
Yeah, and when you talk about Boston, let's turn the page on them. Look, the familiarity is there for both teams. Again, when you play a team, this is the best rivalry in the Eastern Conference. This is a third time in 4 seasons now. It's not a fluke, these two teams. And I know people are going to storyline of the 8th seed and the way they've come back. This is a team that last year in the Heat was a 1 seed, a team that expected this.
It stops when the ball goes up.
Yeah, that narrative is gone away. They clearly are not an 8th seed. They clearly are a top 4 type seed, which everyone expected to be in that mix. They didn't play well for whatever reason, but they figured it out. When you look at this matchup, it's clear Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown are dangerous. It's also clear that the size of the Celtics. Now, Robert Williams isn't the same Robert Williams we saw last year, but his size can certainly give Miami problems. If they can get Bam away from the basket, the Heat don't have rebounders. The Heat struggle getting those boards. Credit to Bam for boxing out better as the series went on against the Knicks, a big factor in trying to push those big bodies away. But Miami can get itself in trouble with Horford and Williams and with what Brown and Tatum can create, that it can be an issue in how they attack that situation of keeping Bam close to the basket, not letting him pull away. The beauty of Bam is he defends everybody, right? The negative of that is that sometimes that means defending a guy that's away from the basket, and that creates opportunities for offensive rebounds and second chances. We saw the Knicks just drive the Heat crazy, and a big reason why they stuck around in that series in a couple games. Boston is a much better team than New York. If Boston has those opportunities on second chances, Clay, it's going to be hard for Miami to win 4 games in the series. Again, I don't think Miami has to out-rebound Boston, but the differential can't be 15-16 as we saw a couple times against the Knicks.
Yeah, and overall it was 30 against the Knicks. I think it was like 271 to 240 or something along those lines. And so the thing about Bam is if Horford's going to take him outside and they're basically saying, okay, we're going to keep Bam out of the paint, then I think you see more Kevin Love. And when you go back to the series against New York, it was fascinating looking at the Bam averaged 7 box outs a game. There was nobody anywhere close. The next closest guy to him in the entire conference semifinals, I think, was Mitchell Robinson at like 4.
Yeah, Bam was phenomenal in that series in a lot of ways.
And that didn't mean that he always got the rebound, but what it meant was he changed the entire series where even though the Heat got badly out-rebounded early, he started to level it off, and then they fell back in Game 5 and lost that one. Then they came closer in Game 6. So if you're going to take Bam away from the basket, that also means that Al Horford's away from the basket. So then it becomes, okay, can Kevin Love keep either Rob Williams or whoever else may be out there on the floor for Boston off of the glass and allow Caleb Martin to fly in? Because that's the thing that Caleb Martin has done really, really well with this team is Caleb Martin, even if he doesn't get the rebound, he causes so many problems with how he attacks rebounding that either he's going to fly in and tip it or other guys on the Celtics are going to be like watching out for him to fly in, and so their eyes are diverted away. So if you have Bam outside, I think the way you counter that is Kevin Love has to be really good at boxing out his guy. Maybe I would see them kind of doing that a little bit more. And that way you make sure that Boston doesn't dominate the glass like we saw New York do it a number of times.
And look, if there's anything Spo proved is he's not afraid to tinker with the rotation. He went 10 deep in the series against the Knicks. That may not be the case against Boston. It may be the case personnel-wise, who gets in at certain spots. I will say for Miami, too, either the way Kyle Lowry's playing, the way Duncan Robinson started to look more like himself, the spacing with Duncan and giving him looks. Kyle has been phenomenal. The work he's done, everything that the Heat expected and wanted in big moments like this, Kyle has provided, from big shots to stripping the ball away and frustrating opponents into fouls, loose balls, steals. Kyle is at that level where you feel so comfortable. And it's funny because Spo was asked the other day, I can't remember which shooter on it was. It may have been prior to Game 5 in New York. And he said, people talk about him coming off the bench. He's our 6th starter. Like, I don't buy this coming off the bench stuff because he's going to be in the biggest of moments. So the whole thing about him not starting a game, we see where Kyle is in the biggest moments, finishing during runs in big situations. And Gabe, to his credit, has played well too in a lot of spots. Now, Gabe, again, tailed off a bit. The Heat are going to need more of the Gabe that we saw early in the series against the Knicks because they're still missing Tyler Hero. I think big picture too, when you look at this matchup, you break down what Boston can do, you break down what the Heat can do. Those are the knowns, right? While there are some changes to each roster, the addition of Kevin Love, the addition of Malcolm Brogdon, there are some things, guys being out like Hero and Oladipo, Williams maybe not being the same. I think the one big change is clearly at coaching. And when you look at Joe Mazzulla, and he took a lot of heat in that series against the Sixers, a lot of people questioning his decisions in game situations, not calling timeouts, finally going to the bigger lineup as the series went on. I think he did a good job as it went on. I think there's clearly a guy that's kind of feeling his way as a head coach for the first time. But Clay, very rarely do I say a key to a series as a head coach because it's so much make or miss in players. But to me, in a series that might be about as tight as you can get, as close as you can get in potentially 7 games, the difference between Eric Spoelstra being the head coach of one team and Mazzulla being the head coach of another, to me, that gap is enormous and really could be a difference in helping Miami win this series.
And it also speaks to how good Ime Udoka was for Boston before he left. And so I think this isn't about Joe Mazzulla being a bad coach. It's about you had, I would say, the best coach in the NBA right now in Eric Spoelstra, and somebody who at that point was a very close second in Ime Udoka. I just think the world of his ability. And so I feel like that, if you want to call it a drop-off from just elite to someone who it does appear is kind of feeling his way through it, as you put it.
By the way, as he should. He's never been in these situations as a head coach. Eric Spoelstra had to live through that years ago.
Sure, we could be talking about him 3 years from now as being one of the top 2 or 3 coaches in the NBA. You deal in the now, and it's, okay, if the Heat would have an advantage, it's, okay, let's say they get a split in the first 2 games and they're going back to Miami. Well, your hope is that Spo is just one game ahead when it comes to adjustments, one step ahead, that, okay, well, we did this. They're going to try to adjust to it this way. We've seen that in the playoffs before, so we're going to do this. So, yes, I think that does make a difference. As the series goes on, I think when they jump the ball up for game 1, it's not going to be game 1. It's going to be game 8.
No, I think it's the adjustment within the games, as you said, as game 2, game 3. When it comes back to Miami, if there's a split, what did we learn? What can Mazzulla change and tinker with? What did Spo learn? Because again, we saw Spo as the series went on against New York, try different things, when to use the zone, areas to get Bam closer to the basket and to rebound. Those are things that, again, I don't know if Mazzulla, in practical experience as a head coach, is ready for. Talent-wise, he's got the players, and it is going to come down to make or miss. Look, if Joe Mazzulla and Eric Spoelstra call in place, if Jason Tatum's not hitting shots, Jimmy Butler's not finishing, that's the way it works.
Yep.
But I do think in game prep and game changes, by the way, and when to take a challenge, we've already seen, early challenges, what it did against Milwaukee, and Budenholzer taking that early challenge. We saw it in this in this matchup against Philly, and Boston. Coaching matters, and in this type of series, I think the Heat have a huge advantage with Eric Spoelstra. We'll see how it plays out. I'm not even going to worry about predictions right now. We just found out this game is going. I think it goes 7, though, Clay. I'd love to tell you with the Heat Twitter, it's Heat in 5, but this feels like the kind of series that's going to come down to a shot in the final moments like it did last year. Jimmy missed it. Celtics move on. This year, maybe Jimmy or someone hits it and the Heat move on. But I think this series goes 7 games.
Yeah, if Jimmy's healthy, I'm with you. And that's, to me, that's the difference. And we won't know that until game 1, until we see him out there.
Yeah, and again, all indications are with the 4 days that Jimmy will be himself. But this is going to be fun. It's something we're used to, something we've covered a lot, something that fans are used to, the narrative and the talking points and all the things. So something they're not used to, though, is this. I mean, the Panthers keep shocking the NHL world. And we opened the podcast talking about what was more surprising. Whether you think the Heat, this particular team, or the Panthers particular team is more shocking. Look, the Panthers were the record-wise, points-wise, the best team in the regular season last year. It's not like this is a team that was terrible going into the season. It's quite the opposite. It's a team that faltered all season long after a great year last year. But to reach this point, Clay, is phenomenal. And now the question becomes, can they keep this going? I mean, do you buy into this is not just a team that's believing in itself and hot, but this is truly a team that could keep on winning and have a chance to win a Stanley Cup?
At this point, I think they are. I think they are that good. I think Carolina is great, and so it's going to be I think you're understanding full well what Boston had accomplished in the regular season, and obviously, Toronto extremely talented. Carolina is just playing like a machine right now. So I think that the Panthers can be that good, can be a team that is capable of winning the Stanley Cup final. And still not make it past Carolina because Carolina is just that good. All that out of the way, the thing with the Florida Panthers that was interesting all year long was, and I go back to last year, they win the President's Cup, and even with that, it's just like there was always this feeling with the Panthers that, okay, the other shoe is going to drop at some point, and it usually seems to drop against Tampa Bay. This season, it was that other shoe was dropping all year. Like everybody was, I mean, people were calling for Paul Maurice's job in his first year as a head coach down here, and like, because
I mean, can you blame him?
History,
can you blame him though? There wasn't a very impressive display of regular season hockey, that's for sure.
No, for sure. But it was because like the whole season, everybody was down on them. And then once they made it to the playoffs, I remember very distinctly Paul Maurice saying the next day at practice, after practice, he said, it was nice for us to come in today and just have the pressure off. And I thought that was a really interesting way to put it. I thought he was crazy when I heard him say it.
But how about the fact they fall behind 3-1? They fall behind 3-1 to the greatest regular season team of all time.
And so it's like the mindset flipped this year from the last couple of years where it was like you're just waiting for the other shoe to drop, and then when things start to go wrong in the playoffs, you're like, oh, well, here we go. Whereas with this year's team, it was like things went wrong all year, and then you got in. It's like, okay, well, we've dealt with everything. Nothing we face from here on out, including a 3-1 deficit against the best team in the history of the regular season of the NHL, is going to phase us. And I think that's what's been so impressive about this team. And if they don't make it to the Stanley Cup final, if they don't win the Cup, I don't think it's going to be because, like, they choke or they turn back into a pumpkin.
No, at this point,
it's just going to be because they're going to play a really, really good opponent, either in this round or in the Stanley Cup final.
I mean, Boston, Toronto. I mean, Boston, we've already talked about. Toronto, by the way, an incredibly talented team that falls short, that they not just beat, but they dominated. They almost swept them. They beat them in 5 games. Now you're going to get a Carolina team that's obviously one of the better in the NHL during the regular season, one of the better teams they're going to face all year. And so you're talking about 3 in a row you have to beat. If they don't win it, get to the Stanley Cup final. I mean, this season is still obviously a success. It's still an incredible story. Maybe not the path you would have thought it would be as an 8th seed, but the bottom line is the Panthers have reached a point they hadn't reached since 1996. And you got to give credit to Paul Maurice for sticking it together. You know, the one thing he has said all along is he's a man of routine, right? The routine. And sometimes that got annoying because I think to the outsider, especially the casual hockey fan in South Florida, which quite frankly, we know there are many of, it's okay. Hockey is a sport here that has its diehard base. And then you have others that are just kind of waiting for the Panthers to matter. Now that they matter, you see a team that is loose and relaxed and is taking on this personality. That personality is fun when you're winning, but it's especially fun when you've got a superstar like Matthew Tkachuk. And I think that's the guy that you look at and say, okay, Sergei Bobrovsky's been phenomenal. And you talked, I think you said right off the bat, a hot goalie changes everything in the NHL. Bob has been just that. 50 saves the other day. I mean, it's just unbelievable. But Matthew Tkachuk is a superstar. And with all the talk about what Tkachuk could be and whether the Huberdeau trade and what were they doing and do you want to change the dynamic of a team that won the President's Cup and all this stuff, all along, even in the struggles, Matthew Tkachuk was an all-star, a superstar. Just the team wasn't very good. The team was mediocre. But now that the team is believing and playing better and Bob is playing at that level, we're starting to see the talent that Tkachuk is. He is the kind of guy that's the face of a franchise, quite frankly, could be the face of the NHL with a few guys that could lead this team to a Stanley Cup final. That's where I kind of hang my hopes on for the Panthers to keep this run going because he's so much fun to watch. He's such a dynamic personality, player, leader. The stuff he says in the locker room post-game, you know, the other day when he said, we're coming back. Remember that in the series? We're coming back here.
Yeah.
When they beat Boston and they made it a series again at 3, he's like, we're coming back here. I think it was at 3-2 it made it after beating Boston. Yeah. And lo and behold, not only did they come back, they finish it. And now they're in the Eastern Conference final. That's where I stand on the Panthers on why they could keep this ride going.
And the other thing, Matthew Tkachuk, after they won Game 5, you know, he's doing the post-game news conference, and he goes, "Yeah, we're in a place that you know, maybe nobody outside of us believed we'd be. You know, I guarantee we saw a bunch of Maple Leafs fans didn't think that we could do it. Like there's this thing with him. There's this edge that
I love it. Yeah,
I think you when you have it in your superstar, it's going to permeate the entire team. And look, it's really cool. Alexander Barkov still wearing the C and all that. But it's clear that this team has taken on more of the identity of a bad man in Matthew Tkachuk.
Yeah, but a chill bad man, right? Like a chill. The guy's walking around in flip-flops enjoying South Florida.
Well, but he also, when his teammate gets hit in the back, gets checked in the back as the clock striking zero at the end of the period
right
against
after him.
Boston, he has no problem taking a penalty
Right
and
after
right back. I mean, that's the type of thing that when your superstar does it, everybody else is gonna back it up. And I do think that there is a little bit of a comparison to me with Jimmy Butler in that respect. That, you know, when you have the guy that when he's on the ice or the court, he is the one who is going to command the room. That's rare. And you know, I think it's unfortunate that you go back to last year and Jonathan Huberdeau with the trade, it was kind of like, oh, well, we're moving him out because we need to get tougher, whatever. But I think you are seeing that whether it's just that maybe Barkov's mentality is not quite at that level that Kachuk's is when it comes to being this dominant force, they needed it. They were lacking it. They needed somebody to come in and be that, and it couldn't just be a player that's going to be on your third line or whatever. You needed to be your star, and Kachuk's been everything. So I'm with you. I think like if they're going to advance, it's going to be because not only is he a great player, but he's also got that dog mentality, and he's just going to be the baddest dude in the room.
What's in common beside the 8th seed is that they're here in the Eastern Conference Final, the Heat and the Panthers, and that they once again will have to do it as an underdog, which they both don't care. And we're going to continue to enjoy this ride because I don't think anybody expects at this point outside of South Florida. Everybody's waiting for the shoe to drop, right? Everybody's waiting for the Cinderella run to end. Everybody's waiting for these teams to turn into a pumpkin. Okay, yeah, the Heat, they're going to look like 8 seeds. They're going to lose in 4 or 5 games. None of us now believe that that's going to happen because of what these teams have done through 2 rounds. And it's the narratives, the parallels between these 2 teams is so much fun to see. So on we go to the Eastern Conference Final. Clay, you and I, you will be headed to Raleigh, correct?
Going to Carolina in my mind.
Yeah, Clay will be covered for Local 10. I will be heading to Boston to cover for Local 10. We'll have you covered throughout, hopefully with at least a split for each team on the road before they come back home for some games. But enjoy it. We're at a high, unlike I think we've ever seen in South Florida sports, to have both of our teams like this in the Eastern Conference Finals, thinking of championships. It has been an unprecedented fun run, and we're going to continue to cover it on Local 10, online, and here on our podcast. As always, we thank you for watching and listening. We shall talk very, very soon.